The Nigerian intellectual property landscape has witnessed tremendous growth, mostly propelled by technological advancement and a youthful population eager to showcase their talent across various platforms. Creatives have repeatedly underscored the sector's pivotal role in the nation's soft power diplomacy and economic diversification efforts. However, intellectual property right holders in Nigeria face persistent challenges. Instances of piracy, unauthorized distribution, and exploitation of intellectual property remains prevalent, leading to substantial revenue losses for stakeholders. The complex nature of enforcement and monitoring exacerbates these challenges. What is the way forward?
Hi, I'm William Umoh, the Legislative Reforms Analyst with the Electronic Center. I'll be your host for today's episode of The Leading Voices, and we have Ms. Chinenye Uwanaka with us here today. Ms. Chinenye Uwanaka is an intellectual property expert and is also the managing partner of the Firma advisory. She will be discussing intellectual property rights in Nigeria, as well as how it affects the economy and businesses, as well as right holders in Nigeria. Ms. Chinenye Uwanaka, you're welcome. The first question we have is, so people will necessarily not know what means they can take in protecting their intellectual property works. So please, can you tell us the means or ways that IP right holders can explore in protecting their intellectual property works within the Nigerian intellectual property regulatory framework?
Okay, thank you for that question. Thank you for having me. Intellectual property is a topic I'm very passionate about because we're in the fourth industrial revolution, right? So we're in the knowledge-based economy. So most of the biggest companies of the world, like tech companies, you have Facebook, you have Instagram, all this, they're all, creations of the mind. And so a lot of the softwares, a lot of the ideas are intangible. And so sometimes when you talk about intellectual property, people think it's something so abstract, but they don't understand that all of us hold intellectual property. We have assets. The way you have land and houses, we also have assets. We write books, we do poems, we create art. We do so many things that we can actually protect, our intellectual property rights, So there are different types, right? So there's trademarks. So when you see a brand like Coca-Cola or LV, if you want Gucci, like, Nigerians love their designers. Yeah. When you see, those are trademarks, right? The logos and all that, those are trademarks. You also have copyrights as well. I talked about being an author or being a musician. We have Afrobeats and all this stuff. So most of those songs, have copyrights on them. We also have industrial design and patents as well. So when you see different types of technologies, they're covered by patents, be it medicine, there's patent for medicine, for plants, for all the different sectors. So you see, I've talked about agriculture. I've talked about manufacturing, cars, the design of the car, So IP protection cuts across various sectors. And like I said, it affects almost every individual one way or the other.
All right, thank you very much for that elaborate response. So in your experience as an IP law expert, what factors do you think have contributed to infringement cases? And how do you think IP rights owners can enforce the rights when being infringed upon?
I think the first challenge is knowledge. A lot of people don't know about intellectual property and the way to protect it. So I'll give you a case in point. Being a lawyer, I have a law firm called the Firma Advisory. And we had a notable case that we handled that had to do with intellectual property for designs, like furniture designs.
Okay.
So they actually had a design and a utility patent. And it's one of the leading furniture, woodwork, and design company in Nigeria. They do projects across the country. Guess what? Their staff were undercutting them, taking their trade secrets, taking their intellectual property, their designs, and mass producing it for, cheaper, So they were losing money. And when we took up this case, it was a huge challenge trying to get the police, the law enforcement to see it as a crime. So it's easy for someone to steal your phone, your iPhone, and someone knows, oh, you stole my phone, and they can arrest you. But if you steal my intellectual property, people are like, allow them now. Maybe they're just trying to walk. So this is the challenge we have with knowledge. A lot of people are not knowledgeable about that fact. That's one of the means. Because if you're not knowledgeable, then how can you even protect it? Another challenge, obviously, is enforcement. You can have a law on paper, but then the enforcement is so weak because we have very weak institutions. Even when you try to go to court, like in that case, we spent how many years? And the company is losing money, paying lawyers and all that stuff. So, and then are you talking about the music industry, the movie industry? The late Onyeka Onwenu, apparently there was a time she went to NTA and she was weeping in front of NTA because NTA was playing her music without paying her royalties. So you have it happening both to the high and the mighty. People who have served us, a lot of musicians, Nollywood veterans, they die broke. It's not like in the US where you see Michael Jackson's estate, he's dead, but they're still making so much money. So these are some of the challenges that affects enforcement of intellectual property rights in Nigeria.
All right, so from what you've explained, so can you briefly shed light on how the lack of structure in the lack of course, structure within the intellectual property system, how do you think it affects businesses and the economy generally?
So our economy is losing a lot. And I'm not saying it, we focus so much on oil and gas, and that's the problem with Nigeria. Most of our exports, most of our FX comes from oil. Our biggest export should be our intellectual property, because this is a sector that you don't even need to market. If you go to Paris, if you go to London, if you go to the US, our artists are selling out stadiums. Our music is on the airways. Our designs, our art. So the kind of revenues in hundreds of billions. I give you a case in point. Last year alone, Afrobeats made $100 million, 2023. Only 2% came to Nigeria. Only 2%. So we have all these big names. We're not making money from it. The tech companies, all that. So the economy is losing money. The artists themselves are losing money. The creatives, and I'm just giving the creative industry. It's not, I told you it's not just the creative industry.
Several aspects.
We have the manufacturing industry. Do you know how much people lose when their goods are counterfeit? They have a lot of counterfeit. Do you know how much investment Nigeria as a nation is losing? I listened to one of the countries, Nigeria, we usually do all these US Africa summits, South Korea Africa summits, and one of them happened recently where they were saying, oh, please come and invest in our country, come and invest, we are looking for FDI, foreign direct investment. But guess what? A lot of companies don't feel comfortable setting up in Nigeria because they know that if their IP rights are breached, there's no recourse. The American Business Council, the same thing. They mentioned one of the biggest problems with our economy and the investment environment is weak IP laws. So it's something people don't really talk about, but it's a huge factor that we need to pay attention to. So like I said, personal, loss as a nation in terms of revenues. All
right. So from the various aspects you've mentioned as regards protection, so let's come down to the aspect of the legal framework that we have. So besides the Copyright Act of 2022 and most of our intellectual property laws, like the Patent and Designs Act, most of them are actually dated, right? And so how well equipped do you think these laws are to protect and enable effective enforcement of IP rights in Nigeria currently as it stands?
So like you mentioned, a lot of our laws are obsolete. England, where we borrowed most of our laws from, has moved on from most of those laws. We still have laws from the 50s and 60s. When we were not even born. Meanwhile, all these disruptions, unicorns have come out of our country. You have AI, you have blockchain, you have so many things going on. And so our legal framework is very weak. You mentioned the Copyright Act. There's also some things that are still not part of it. Yeah. So there needs to be, our law needs to keep evolving to meet up with the evolution in society. There's also a lot of, having the law is one thing, like we mentioned, the institutions, the civil service, the courts, the police, it's a whole value chain. So we need to keep engaging with the National Assembly because they are the lawmakers. We need them to take these laws seriously. There needs to be up. There's no reason why our trademark and there's no reason why it's as old as it is. We need a responsive National Assembly. In the US, for instance, I'm part of a group that people from Congress, their support staff, and the people in the industry, they meet often. So there's something called the Music Modernization Act that came out as a result, because then all the older songs that were not being streamed, artists, now they're streaming platforms, they were not getting those things. So they had to modernize and come up with an act because of continuous engagement with the sector. So we need to do a lot, to get the sector to where it needs to be.
All right. So you've talked about innovations, you've talked about technology and all of that. And of course, you just mentioned the streaming platforms. So with the advent of artificial intelligence, right, do you think it has enabled or impeded the growth and protection of IP-related works, and how can right holders actually protect themselves against present-day technological trends that seems to somewhat be advancing what they do, but there are still technicalities around it?
Yeah, so the government, I know that the Minister of Communications and Digital Economy is very passionate about AI, is working on an AI strategy. They brought experts from around the world and within the country. So AI is something that a lot of people around the world are still learning about. The African Union just released their AI strategy as well. The United Nations and other, there's also an EU AI Act, which is also a landmark act. So it's an area that is still evolving, and people are still trying to deal with the ethics of AI. Yes, in the course of research and all that, people's data and all that can get, people's images or whatever it might be. So there is that risk, However, we need to ensure that our laws, our policies are up to date to deal with some of those things. AI also as a tool can be also used as an advantage to protect, because when we talk about the fact that we don't have proper digital, a database of our copyrights, for instance, or our trademarks, we don't have a proper digitized system in Nigeria where you can just do a search and see everything. You can also leverage on AI, the way AI helps with medicine, the way AI helps with, so it's like a blessing, but it can also be a curse. So it just depends on how you choose to use it, basically.
All right. Thank you very much for that. So at the beginning of this, you mentioned something about the knowledge gap or knowledge deficit within the industry and how that affects right holders from even knowing that they own the rights and then how to go about enforcing. So the question is, considering that most creatives and right holders are within the young population of Nigeria, how can educational institutions contribute to improving IP literacy and increased public awareness?
Our institutions have to become up to date. Unfortunately, even when I schooled in the UK. I did my undergrad, I studied law. When I came back and I did law school here, I realized the gap in knowledge. Abroad, when you school, you deal with the law society, you even see the proposed legislations to come, and they make you interact and dissect, and you don't have a lot of schools in Nigeria or institutions where you can go and learn about maybe, apart from IP law, because like we said, IP cuts across different sectors. We need to have places where people can go and learn. Let's say I'm a creative, I'm in music business, I'm in whatever sector I'm in. I can go and do a short course, get a certification, IP and innovation is closely tied to the development of nations. If you look at the US, Silicon Valley, you have Stanford, you have MIT, you have all those places that are system structures where knowledge is assimilated, where there's co-creation, where there's innovation, where there's research. We don't spend a lot on research and development. It's closely tied to our industrialization as a nation. You cannot, if you don't have, IP is like the bedrock, is the foundation of industrialization. So at the end of the day, we need our institutions to stop regurgitating what happened back in the day, just learning about the problems. We need to learn about the solutions. How can you learn about the solutions? By testing, by having spaces where people can come and experiment, document their experimentation, commercialize. There are people in the US, for instance, that, not even in the US, Morocco. I was in Morocco in December. I was in a university there where all these things I'm talking about were there live. As you're in the university, once you're doing any research on a plant, agriculture, on a tech solution, before you know it, you get funding, seed funding from the university. It's being commercialized. So that's how our institutions can work closely to develop the minds of our citizens from a young age to learn about these important principles. Not only learn about it, but to experiment. As you're experimenting, you're getting your patents. Imagine if you have a technology now that can solve cancer, cure cancer, or that can, bring a big solution to Nigeria's problem. We have crude theft. You design a technology that can stop crude theft. It's commercialized. Before you know it, NNPC deploys and pays you how many billion. That young child or that young 21-year-old that just graduated from university becomes a billionaire. This is how you create wealth. This is how you create jobs. This is how countries rise from poverty. So this is something we must take very seriously. We have a ministry where, unfortunately, a lot of people there, we recently did a judges training, or it wasn't recent, it was about 2 years ago. NESG organized it, the facilitators I facilitated. And you would be surprised at the highest level of, to Supreme Court of Appeal. They didn't understand intellectual property and innovation. So we have a long way to go.
Wow.
Because we have a creative and a youthful population. The only way we can harness them is by ensuring that we're monetizing the creations of their mind. That's it.
Oh, thank you very much for that. So, in the course of our conversation, you mentioned Oyeka Uwenu. I remember an interview she did shortly before she passed. I think that was on Channels. And she mentioned the fact that the likes of CUSON and some other bodies that are meant to help her monetize or collect monies actually collected these monies, but they did not pay to her. So the question is, how has the institutional and administrative barriers hindered effective IP exploitation and management, and of course the enforcement, and what strategies do you think can be deployed to strengthen and better position such institutions to be able to manage and enforce IP rights effectively and efficiently?
Yes, this is a great question, because the challenges are multifaceted. The collection societies are one of the problem. In the past, they had a lot of court cases, issues, ownership, there were scandals, that people took money, went and built their houses and all that stuff. I've been part of even some of those dialogue. So there is that challenge of lack of transparency, lack of even the technology. This music are being played in different places, stadiums, restaurants, public arenas. How can you even track where the music is being played? How many channels, radio stations, to be able to even effectively monitor how much revenues or royalties should be? You understand what I'm saying? So they have a problem with capacity, funding. Some of them complain about funding. Then from the artist's point of view, most of them don't even like to register with our local ones. They prefer the foreign ones because they know that they don't have to. Even when you're sleeping, you're making money. I heard one of the Nigerian artists, I think it was Rema, made how many $1 million from Spotify. Yeah. Just from, and you're not stressing yourself. So a lot of people, because of this corruption, lack of transparency, don't even want to. And that's why I told you that Afrobeats made $100 million last year. Only 2% came to Nigeria. So there is a challenge. I heard one popular musician in Nigeria, like one of the biggest musicians, saying that they collected just 40,000 naira or something, revenues. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it's a huge challenge. The industry itself needs to get organized. They need to have proper corporate governance. They need people to represent them as an industry to ensure that some of these ills, and then we need a policy. Please, this ties very neatly to NESG is supporting. NESG currently has an MOU with the new ministry, the Ministry of Art, Culture and Creative Economy. I'm also the thematic lead for the creative industry under the TEX, Policy Commission. So we are currently working on a policy, a cultural policy that will include a creative economy policy, because it's one of our biggest exports now as a nation. And if we don't have a policy that would regulate all these issues we've talked about, government needs to take it seriously, citizens, stakeholders across board.
All right. So, with your experience as an IP expert and with the exposure you've had, how have advanced countries approached the legal and regulatory framework of IP to address emerging IP challenges? For instance, although I wouldn't say the part of infringing on copyright, like imitating, using people's work without permission, is a new thing. But how have they been able to address these situations, and what would you recommend that Nigeria does similar to that, or maybe even more advanced than that, in order to appropriately address the IP infringement cases we have?
Thank you. So also another good question. I'll answer in two parts. The first part is the challenges. One, we have very weak institutions. In any country where you don't have enforcement, it becomes like a kangaroo, it becomes like a free-for-all. Even with the new Copyright Act, the sanctions are still I think for companies 1 million, there's another one 500,000 in terms of like the fines or option of imprisonment. It's just like a slap on the wrist. It doesn't deter people. If you're a big corporation, you can say, okay, let me just mass produce this person, make 100 million naira, then I'll just pay 1 million naira fine. I don't know if you get my point. So the law enforcement authorities need training. In India, for instance, we did analysis of the policy, IP policy in India. They have a special department in their police force on IP. This is how you are able to, so those people, they have a training. It's not when I go and meet them, they say, no, allow this person. No, this is why countries rise. You put systems in place. Same thing with South Africa. South Africa has an agency that is like their CAC, the way we have our Corporate Affairs Commission, and an IP regulator joint fused together. So in the case of you can register a company, if I register Chinenye Nigeria Limited, somebody else can go and register Chinenye Nigeria Limited, not knowing that I have a copyright or a trademark for Chinenye Nigeria Limited, because our CAC is not, and our CAC and both our patent registry, our copyright registry, they're not linked. They don't have a similar database. So people can do and undo. So you can have a one unified office where that happens. And like I talked about, having a policy is one thing. I'm happy we're developing one, but implementation is really the true test. How are we upskilling our this thing? There's something for patent, for instance, in Nigeria, we do paper application. This is something that is scientific. You need to have a test of novelty. You need to be able to have experts, engineers, scientists, in the ministries. But can we pay for those people in the ministries? So these are the things we need to get serious. If you look at the Asian countries, they decided that they wanted to be a world power. They don't want to just follow America and the rest of them. They said, Japan, China, and they reverse engineer, they've used this whole technology and innovation and intellectual property to become one of the greatest nations. I believe that Nigeria has an advantage. We need to put the policies in place. We need to put that legal framework and enforcement. If not, we're going to keep talking about this, in the next few years to come. I hope not, anyways.
Well, thank you very much for the detailed exposition. So just as your final words, what advice will you give to, because we now have two intersections. We have the right holders, and then we have the institutions that are meant to help uphold, enforce, and of course exploit the rights in order to create tangible benefits. So what words of advice do you have to give to the right holders in terms of being able to channel their energy to creating something that is worth being exploited, and to the institutions that are meant to help protect and also help facilitate the exploitation?
Okay, so what would my advice be? To the artists, to the creatives, to the scientists, to the innovators, you need to educate yourself. You need to learn about the worth of your creativity and what you can earn from it. There are certain treaties coming to the institutions now, like there is a TRIPS. There are some of these conventions and treaties that Nigeria is a signatory to, but we've not domesticated it. So we need to domesticate. We need to train our judges. We need to train our police officers. We need to train our civil servants in those relevant ministries. We need to sensitize the general public. Do not use fake things. Do not stream people's music or movies. Do not, buy books in the roadside. Those books that the counterfeit. Just know that this is somebody's work. The way someone builds a house and it's their home, it belongs to them. This is the same way somebody sat down to create these things. Chinua Achebe, Chimamanda. These people are great because of their creativity, right? Some of the things we're talking about in agriculture, in manufacturing, all those things can be solved if we strengthen this. So let us take it seriously as a nation. Let us know that with this fourth industrial revolution, we need to move to that knowledge base. People are moving away from fossil fuels, hydrocarbons. People are moving away from oil. If we want to be a rich nation, if we want to compete, we need to compete using the best technology and the best innovation and the best creativity. So that's my advice. Let's take it seriously and let's equip ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chinenye Uwanaka. It's been an insightful and educating session on today's episode of Leading Voices with Ms. Chinenye Uwanaka. So today we discussed intellectual property rights in Nigeria. We looked at how the institutional framework that we have in Nigeria affects the enforcement of intellectual property rights, and how beneficial it will be for right holders to actually be knowledgeable and educated on the rights that they have as creatives. We also underscored the fact that intellectual property cuts across not just the music industry, film industry. We also have intellectual property in agriculture, we have intellectual property in manufacturing and the likes of others. And we've also looked at how various countries have been able to develop the intellectual property structure in order to be able to properly cater for the intellectual property rights of creatives.
Hello everyone, my name is Chinenye Uwanaka. I'm a lawyer, a nation builder, and a concerned citizen like you. You're watching Leading Voices on NESG TV at nesgroup.org/TV.
If you enjoyed today's session, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.